So, when I started thinking about doing this series of videos, I thought to myself, I'm going to need some help here because I don't know what Playmates put out when they were active in the 90s. So, I tripped across this book on eBay. And the funny thing is that this book in and of itself is probably a collectible because it's 24 years old. So I had a look at this morning, and it was written by a lady, I believe, who herself was a collector of Playmates toys as they were coming out at the time in the States. And I'll come back to that because that in and of itself is quite interesting. But basically, she's trying to put together quite a sort of definitive capture of all the items that they produced, and indeed some pricing for them. But of course that pricing is now 25 years out of date. So ignore the pricing because I don't think you can really be held to that anymore. But it is a terrific help for me because it means that I know that I've got actually a fair proportion of the ships from this book I now have, which I don't think is bad going considering that they shouldn't really be in the UK. But as I say, I'll come to that. So it's very nicely illustrated. It's got some good pictures in it, and you know I think you'd be able to find this on eBay fairly straightforwardly if you wanted to. As I say, you know I just sort of tripped across it and thought, yeah, that's absolutely what I'm after. And I don't think it's kind of commercially available, so you'd have to go to eBay for it. Now, I'm actually going to pause on this first page here, because this is a really useful piece of information for me here. Because it said in 1988, the Louis Galoob toy company was the first to throw their hat into the Star Trek The Next Generation action figure ring. Now, I've seen Galoob figures, and I've shown you a Galoob Enterprise D. In fact, I will briefly grab it from over here for the sake of context, because I really thought this was really, really good, but it was a reminder to me of how early on Star Trek The Next Generation actually started filming and appearing on our TV screens, because this was, I think, in '88. So this is probably one of the very earliest examples of Star Trek The Next Generation merchandise. And as I say, it's not what I'm looking at in this video. But you can see there that is a Galoob item. And you can also see there the figures that are being mentioned in this little article here. So it's pretty cool. It's got a detachable saucer section. You know, it's a good little bit of die-cast fun there. Now, the reason I wanted to come back to this page when I reopen it is because the second I saw it, I thought to myself, well, hang on a minute. This is something a bit different, because you can see there Jean-Luc Picard, stock number 6011, and apparently ASST is assortment number. It's not sort of asset number as I thought when I started looking at the Star Trek phaser. But here he is. Look, so this is the real life version of this picture. Do you notice the immediate difference? Space, the final frontier. Star Trek The Next Generation, La Nouvelle Génération, La Seguinte Génération, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. Clearly, this is intended for a European market. That is intended for the US market, which doesn't care about other languages. So, I don't actually now know whether or not this book is actually going to be definitive for me in the UK, because as much as I moan about them not releasing stuff in Europe, for all I know, this was actually a UK phenomenon that we didn't get it, but other countries in Europe did. That's possible. It's possible. But clearly they have gone to a lot of trouble on this version, even down the side here, to actually use different languages on the packaging, whereas this simply doesn't. And you can see the other interesting thing is this European version has Bandai mentioned on the front bottom right corner and Paramount there, whereas this version has Playmates mentioned there. Here we've got Playmates mentioned on the left. So there is clearly a distinction between the packaging that they're using for Europe and the packaging that they're using for the US based on that solely. So I'm imagining that, as useful as things like this are as a reference point, it may well be that the European ranges were not identical to the American ranges. So there is definitely a question mark over that. So while someone might think that they'd collected all of the American range of it, there could be a whole other European range which is also available, which could have quirks. And one thing I know of, that Gareth once mentioned to me, because he got giddy when he managed to pick it up from Doncaster, was that he'd got a 7 of 9 in an unusual coloured uniform. And I don't think I've actually seen it when I flicked through here. So I wonder if that was a European market quirk that we happened to get and for whatever reason wasn't available in America. So these are the sort of initial... Now, I didn't actually look at the asset. I think I'm calling it asset now, it's not, it's assortment. So yeah, 6010. So it has the same designation as the American reference in the book there, but as I say, it's clearly not the same packaging. So I think that there's a whole different set of European options for these figures. So I guess if you took European figures to America, they'd get quite excited because you'd then be providing them with something that they haven't already seen. So this is obviously very much focused on next generation figures. And it's a surprisingly large range of figures. I mean, they were doing a lot of stuff, fair dues to them. So I'd never try and collect all of this, but things like the Huborg and stuff like that, I think are pretty cool, actually. I think the Q's pretty decent as well, but these are all sort of, I think they're 4.5-inch figures. So they're bigger than the Gloob figures were. Apparently the Gloob figures were more along the lines of the Star Wars sized figures, but these are slightly larger and they've got slightly more articulation as well, compared to Star Wars figures now. So we keep going. There are various exclusives and so on scattered throughout here as well. And then we get into films. Now, this is one of the question marks I have in my head about the license that Playmates had, because they do go back to the original series in terms of some of the figures that they cover. But weirdly, there isn't a refit enterprise that they do. They only have an original series enterprise, and that really sort of puzzled me because the refit enterprise is a very famous version of the enterprise that appears in most of the original movie runs. So I couldn't understand why they hadn't done that, but then it occurred to me that maybe they didn't have the rights for the ships from the early films, because I've only seen ships from them for the later Next Generation films. So I think perhaps Paramount didn't give them the rights to everything because maybe they'd already given the rights for those to somebody else. But we do have figures here from Star Trek The Motion Picture. So that's Kirk from Star Trek The Motion Picture and others from the motion picture as well. So they weren't excluded from making figures for the films. For some reason, we just don't seem to get the ships from the earlier films from Playmates. Now, maybe that was just a judgment call they made. Perhaps they just felt that, for whatever reason, they couldn't stretch to that, or they just chose not to. I don't know. But I would be interested to understand why they felt they couldn't, if they wanted to. So we've got all sorts. Clearly, it's a big, big range of figures. And again, original series figure there. So very, very interesting. Star Trek Starfleet Academy here. Now, I think it mentions a CD-ROM there. Each figure came with a mini Omnipedia Starfleet Academy files CD-ROM. But I don't recall that this was ever produced as a series as such. Maybe it came out as a comic? So I'm just not quite sure how they came to make this particular range of figures with the sort of younger versions of the next gen crew, but that's a thing apparently. Now we're getting into Voyager, so we're getting into 1997. Now I'm just going to keep flicking through here because there was a page later on that really sort of struck me, and I thought that's really strange because that reminds me of something. And as it turned out, I was spot on. I was quite proud of myself. So here you see we're getting into Star Trek First Contact territory, so we're getting into the late 90s now, 1998 here. And you know, this is kind of on the edge in terms of when Playmates could actually do their stuff, because I think this is about when their license ran out originally. Got various sort of people getting beamed out here in sort of translucent plastic. Got exclusives and special figures, so I imagine that these are the sort of ones that, you know, Playmates hunters in the States would particularly look out for. And apparently this Cisco figure here only came with a game. So again, you know, you'd have to sort of hunt that one down pretty hard, I imagine, depending on, you know, how many of the versions of it were put out. And I think some of these were limited runs as well. So there's a trifold Borg there. More in the Transporter series, Paramount Pictures exclusives, Toy Fair exclusives, I think, here. Now that might be the one that I was thinking of. So that's 7 of 9 in her silver outfit. And there are only 10,000 of each of these figures produced. Now, I don't know if that applies to the European market as well, but her value there isn't very high. So maybe that's become more unusual later, or maybe that's not the one I'm thinking of. That, I think it was it a bluish colour, the one I'm thinking of? But anyway, so we keep going. Then we get into, so these are the 4.5 inch multi-packs and boxed sets. So here you can get sets that are sort of representative of a particular episode. So we've got Ensign Harry Kim, Species 8472. So, you know, if you were into the TV series from this era, then they covered pretty much everything going, clearly. Some Toys R Us exclusives here, Target exclusives. I don't know who Target are as a store, really. Then we start getting bigger. So we get 6-inch figures as well now for the movies there. I think those look pretty cool. I think they got that little bit extra, you know, a little bit extra detail, because obviously, you know, they've got a larger size to play with there. Combat Action Series, Warp Factor Series 1, TNG 97. Definitely seen those before. Picard and Starfleet spacesuit. Another Warp Factor Series. So again, they're getting some more accessories here, so they're getting some consoles and stuff to play with. And 7-inch figures. Then 9-inch figures, and it just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. These are looking more and more doll-like now, I think it's fair to say. So we've got Star Trek First Contact figures in there, Star Trek Collector Series, nice Q figure there. Q in Judge robes. A Jem'Hadar soldier, we've got Golda Cat. 7 of 9 in silver biosuit, but that's a much bigger article altogether. Now, this really interested me, because as soon as I saw this, I thought, hang on, I've seen that before, but this is a Playmates book. It's not an Art Asylum or a Diamond Select book, but very, very interesting. Little comment here. Assortment number 65390, Alien Combat Series, 1999, so right at the edge of Playmates releases. This series of oversized and muscle-bound aliens was sculpted for Playmates by Art Asylum. There is no special collector's numbering on these figures. So we have a Borg drone and a Klingon warrior. So of course, Art Asylum also produce things for Diamond Select, and lo and behold, a Klingon drone. And doesn't that packaging look somewhat reminiscent to this packaging here? So I think that there was a certain liberty taken there between that packaging and this packaging, because both are by Art Asylum. So I think that Art Asylum were basically being subcontracted to by both Playmates and Diamond Select, who then took over the franchise. And that's why those figures look so similar to me, because as soon as I saw that and that in that packaging, I thought, hang on, that is so similar to the Art Asylum Diamond Select series of 3 that I've seen before, that there must be a linkage, and indeed there was. So again, really glad I picked this book up, because there was probably no way I would have made that link, or even known that existed, had I not read it in these pages. So very, very interesting there to see that sort of that there was in fact a bit of a linkage between Art Asylum and Playmates and Diamond Select. So what I don't really understand is who Art Asylum were, in terms of, you know, why they were sort of interconnected with both companies, apart from the fact that clearly they were doing, there must have been a sort of a third party design house that these bigger distribution type companies were going to say, can you help us produce this, please? So, you know, just a really sort of interesting little factoid there as I was going through. And again, we're into the sort of the big 9-inch figures here, Mirror Universe figures, the Squire of Gothos there, possibly a Q, I think now. First season uniforms, more 7, Nurse Chapel, and some very, very limited 12-inch figures. Apparently they were going to do the other captains, but apparently then they just didn't. All Star Trek series 1999, Insurrection there 98. So they have ships from, as I say, they have ships from all of these sort of the next gen eras, but not from the original movie sequences. That's what I find sort of rather curious. So these are the play sets and then the figures and the ships that I've been trying to sort of focus on, because that's my particular interest area. So they did some really, really clever stuff. This is what I find fascinating about the Playmates range, and it's what made me smile when I got the Enterprise D in my hand for the first time, because I just thought, yeah, do you know what? They really know what they're doing with this. And when you sort of stop and think about it, or when I stop and think about it anyway, the range of stuff that Playmates have put out over the years is quite phenomenal. And I don't even know off the top of my head exactly how many different series they've actually taken on, but it's not insignificant. You know, they've got a huge amount of experience of putting out licensed products. So really, it shouldn't come as any surprise that they've covered it in quite such a level of detail, because they know what they're doing. But as I say, it's this at least suggests they're quite focused on the US market, and yet they did put European packaged versions out as well. So I now found myself a little bit confused as to exactly what was going on in terms of the European market and the UK getting hold of these things. So I won't mention which ones of these I've got, because you know you'll see them in due course. It would spoil the surprise, but suffice to say I have the majority. Not necessarily boxed every time, but you know boxes cost far more money. So you know where I have the boxes, it's a bonus. Where I don't, then you'll just have to use your imagination or go back to this video. So this is a useful introduction to the actual range of ships that they were putting out. And these inner space ones from 95 are arguably sort of the most diverse, but they're also the smallest. And these figures are tiny, tiny figures. They are literally sort of, you know, like thumbnail size figures. They're nothing more than that. So these were this pocket money range of toys, these inner space toys. And I do have a few examples of them. I don't have all of them at all, but I have a few examples that I can show you, some of which are in packaging. And then we move on from those, and we have these little sort of mini playset ones, of which really Inner Space are mini playsets in a sense. But they do these wonderfully clever out there ideas. So they take a Type 2 phaser and turn it into a playset. They take a tricorder, turn it into a playset. They take a comm badge, turn it into a playset. It's completely bonkers, but also very, very clever. And I've got to applaud them for even trying stuff like this, because it's genuinely clever stuff and just using everything they possibly can. And it's also aiming at different budgets as well, which again I think is very, very clever of them. So we continue here in this remains the sort of the Inner Space range here, although it's not labelled as such. But again, you've got Shuttlecraft, Birds of Prey, Romulan Warbird, Defiant, all of which are these little mini play sets. Then we get into the Strike Force ships, and these are a little bit bigger, but the scale of the figures remains the same. So the figures are sort of interchangeable between Inner Space and Strike Force, but the Strike Force ships themselves are a little bit bigger, a little bit more detailed, a bit more, you know, sort of directly styled from the original ships. So less of a playset emphasis and more on an actual ship emphasis, I think it's fair to say there. We've also got these bigger sets there that are sort of modelled after heads of Klingons and Borgs. And then you can get figure packs. So you can get all these little extra figures at that tiny scale to put into your various play sets. And then they did something really interesting, which I don't think Diamond Select ever did. And they built play sets for use with their larger 4.5-inch figures. So they went down the Star Wars route. So they upscaled things to use with the big figures that I showed you earlier on, like Picard. And I thought, that's quite a bold move. And, you know, I wonder how many of those they actually sold, because, you know, you could use them to sort of reenact stuff, but for a kid, I was thinking to myself, does that have that much play value for a child as such? But, you know, from a collector's point of view, I completely get it, because it means you can recreate the bridge of the Enterprise, a transporter room, and so on, you know. So completely see what they were going for with it, but I just thought it was quite a sort of brave thing for them to do. So we've got a shuttlecraft. Now, these ships don't take figures, because these ships are just the ships. But the shuttlecraft does take figures. But these other, the larger ships don't, generally speaking, because they wouldn't really work. They'd have to scale them up massively to make that work in terms of, you know, general's kind of scale. I think the runabout does take a figure as well. Yeah, the runabout holds 2 4.5-inch figures. So again, that I thought was quite clever, because you know, it's shuttlecraft size, so it makes sense you'd put people into it, because the overall ship size is not huge, it's not Starship, it's a shuttlecraft effectively. So yeah, so we've got Enterprise D with battle damage, we've got Enterprise D space talk. So this is the 95 version of the 92 version that I showed you in the introductory video to this series of videos. So you can see, you know, and you've got a battle damaged version as well off the back of Star Trek Generations. So 3 different Enterprise Ds released by Playmates in their 90s run. Klingon Bird of Prey, Enterprise B. Now, interestingly, the original Enterprise, but you see, not the refit. There's no refit Enterprise. So all of these are ships either from the Next Generation movies or from the series. Now, interestingly, they've got the Excelsior there. And I'm just thinking that kind of breaks my previous statement in the fact that the Excelsior only really appears in the original movie sequences, although it does appear in Star Trek Voyager. So they might have found a workaround for Excelsior because it appears in Voyager. Force Hound's energy ribbon, phaser, Winston, and tracked beam. Yeah, I don't. That's a bit of an anomaly to my mind. I'm not quite sure how that works into my theory that they couldn't do original movie series ships unless no one else had pinched the license for that one, so it was still licensable to them. That's an interesting one. So I don't quite know how that one works out, but as I say, it did appear in an episode of Voyager in flashback, so maybe they were able to do it off the back of that. That's possible. So we've got Borg Sphere from First Contact, we've got Phoenix from First Contact, Enterprise from First Contact, Enterprise D, E rather, in that instance, of course. And the Defiant, and an old school Romulan Warbird, and old school shuttlecraft Galileo. And they also did then the Enterprise E from Insurrection. So, as I say, the only thing that's really missing from there are things like a Klingon Katinga, a Cardassian Galore, perhaps. You know, those are other options they could have done, but obviously I think they've gone for the big ticket items, the obvious ones from the movies, and the more the modern iteration of the movies as well. So interesting that they clearly could have done more if they'd wanted to, but I guess they had to draw the line somewhere. You'll also notice there's no Reliant there either. But oddly, the Reliant hasn't been done by Diamond Select either, which I find fascinating. No one's done a big Reliant. It's really odd. So we've got Star Trek Next Generation Phaser, Com Badge, Tricorder, Disruptor there. So again, lots of sort of cosplay-esque type items as well. And this phaser I have shown you already. But there's medical stuff as well. And then you get into Klingon stuff. There's even the risk communicated from the motion picture. So they know their stuff. They do a lot of detail. Medical tricorder again, which is slightly different to a normal tricorder. Insurrection phaser, Starfleet phaser from Star Trek. Actually, that's not Star Trek 5. It's Star Trek 6 in Discovered Countries, but it's probably just a typo. Resin dioramas and statues. So sort of slightly larger, non-toy sculpts that they were putting out as well. 7 of 9, Data and the Queen Borg. So, and then you see, then we get these interesting little funny crossovers between Star Trek and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as you do, because Playmates produced the Turtles. So I guess they weren't prohibited from doing little sort of crossovers like this, with tongues like stuck in cheek. But it's cleverly done. It's cleverly done. Obviously, signed toys. Well, obviously, if you get your toy signed, you have a signed toy. Simple. Skybox trading cards. Non-Playmates items. Yeah. So, very, very handy book. Very, very, very handy book. It was released by Schiffer. If you want to try and find it on eBay. So it should be, as I say, it should be fairly straightforward to find it. By Kelly Hoffman. So that was very much one of my sort of guiding stars when it came, no pun intended, when it came to actually identifying what Playmates put out there that I might perhaps be looking for in terms of getting a reasonable selection together to show to you. I say I'm not going to go for the figures. I do have several of the figures. I do have a Riker and a Data as well that I can show to you. But I'll probably do that in a separate video because this one's going to be a bit of a beast as it is. But yeah, interesting that I discovered about the sort of the Art Asylum crossover. So I might have to do a little bit more research. I think they got absorbed by Diamond Select in the end, because there came a point where Diamond Select stopped mentioning Art Asylum on their ship boxes. So I think they ended up getting absorbed by them, would be my guess. But it'd be interesting to understand what their sort of independent life story was, if you like. So I might well look into that, and I'll mention that again on another video if I get a chance to do some research on that front. And in the meantime, I will start delving into the ships, and I think the easiest way to do it is probably in chronological order. So I will start with my my NX Enterprises, and for that we will have to depart from Playmates because Enterprise came after the Playmates license ended, would be my understanding, and that's why they never released any of the Enterprise figures at this point in time, because Enterprise didn't exist. So they only went as far as the really sort of the end of the I mean, they didn't actually. I don't think they were around late enough to cover Nemesis. So they covered Insurrection to a degree, but that was as far as they could go because that's where the movies were starting to peter out from the original generation of the cast for Next Generation. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there, and I will crack on with some others, hopefully on a weekly basis for you. So cheers for now.